A door once sealed by fear is never truly locked. It only waits for the moment humanity forgets why it was closed. Welcome to the Unveiled Scroll. Before we begin, remember to like, subscribe, and share if you seek stories buried beneath official history, because tonight I will tell you the tale of Forsaken Archive reveals the last covenant in a cataclysm meant to surface. Now a chronicle whispered through ash and parchment, a chapter that does not exist in textbooks, yet stains the margins of civilization. The story begins not with kings or wars, but with a room beneath a ruined abbey somewhere between the old trade roads of Eastern Europe, a place absent from maps, yet persistent in forbidden correspondence. The chamber was known only as the Forsaken Archive, a vault built not to preserve knowledge but to imprison it. Those who laid its stones believed memory itself could become contagious, and what they hid there was not merely ink and vellum, but a truth capable of rotting faith and empire alike. At the center of this archive worked a man named Elias Morkand, a scribe by calling and a penitent by necessity. His hands were steady, but his mind was a battlefield. Elias had been chosen not for loyalty, but for guilt. A former court chronicler, whose earlier writings once justified atrocities committed in the name of order, his punishment was not death, but remembrance he was tasked with, recording what must never be read. The Last Covenant. The covenant was not a treaty between nations, but an agreement between survivors centuries earlier after a calamity so profound it erased cities and rewrote calendars. The official story speaks of plague, famine, and coincidence, but the covenant texts told of something else, an engineered silence, a deliberate forgetting. The elders of that age believed humanity had brushed against a force. It was not meant to command a convergence of belief, fear, and ritual that briefly reshaped reality itself. The price of survival was amnesia. Elias discovered that the covenant demanded more than secrecy, required periodic sacrifices of truth, entire generations raised on carefully pruned history. Every few centuries the archive was reopened, not to reveal, but to confirm that nothing had escaped yet. As Elias transcribed the fading pages, he noticed something wrong: dates that pointed not backward but forward, symbols repeating with increasing urgency, like a warning written by men who knew they would fail. Sleep abandoned him. His dreams filled with imagery too vivid to be imagination: burning towers reflected in black water, crowds kneeling, not in prayer but in terror, and above them all a soundless command pressing into the mind like a hand around the heart. Elias began to suspect that the covenant was not a conclusion, but a delay. The cataclysm had not been prevented, only postponed, and the mechanism of postponement was belief itself, as long as humanity did not. Remember, the force could not fully return, but memory is restless, and history always leaks in the margins of the texts. Elias found his own name, written in an older hand dated centuries before his birth. That was the moment. His rational mind fractured. Fate was not chasing him. He had been summoned. His inner conflict became unbearable. To preserve silence meant condemning the future to blind repetition. To reveal the truth meant accelerating the very disaster the covenant sought to delay. The archive was never meant to be opened by a hero, only by a witness. Elias realized his role was not to choose, but to endure, to become the final link in a chain of men who had all faced the same impossible burden, and like them he would fail because the covenant itself was decaying. Faith and progress, literacy and global connection had weakened the old barriers the world was remembering. Fragments through myth art and unexplained. Elias could feel it in the air beyond the abbey walls, pressure building, a countdown no one else could hear. He sealed the final page with a trembling hand, knowing the act itself was meaningless. The cataclysm was no longer a question of if, but when, and the archive had already begun to whisper beyond stone and soil. In the next part of this story, we will follow how those whispers escaped the vault and infected the modern world, and why the last covenant may be surfacing, not by accident, but by design. In the quiet hum of our digital world, an ancient secret is stirring. It's not locked away in a dusty vault or buried under desert sands. It's hidden in plain sight, fragmented across the very network that connects us all. This is the story of the Forsaken Archive and its distributed awakening. 4 centuries, whispers have echoed through history about a repository of knowledge so profound, so revolutionary, that its guardians chose to shatter it, scattering its pieces across time and space. They feared its power, believing humanity wasn't ready. This wasn't just a collection of books or scrolls. It was a living library of consciousness, technology, and cosmic understanding that defied everything we thought we knew. The legend speaks of the first librarians, a civilization far older than our own, who foresaw a future where their knowledge could either elevate or obliterate their descendants. Faced with this dilemma, they didn't destroy their legacy. Instead, they encoded it into the fabric of reality itself in patterns of starlight, in the genetic code of simple organisms. Even in the chaotic noise between radio frequencies, they created a puzzle with no key, believing that only a species mature enough to solve it without a guide would be worthy of its contents. Now, something has changed. In our hyper-connected age, for the first time in millennia, the scattered fragments are beginning to resonate with each other. Think of it like a million tiny tuning forks, spread across the globe, suddenly starting to vibrate at the same frequency. Anonymous data miners chasing cryptocurrency stumble upon elegant code that seems to write itself. Astrophysicists find anomalies in cosmic background radiation that form impossibly complex patterns. Biologists discover junk DNA sequences that mirror mathematical constants to 1,000 decimal places. Individually, these are just curiosities, anomalies quickly dismissed. But a growing network of independent researchers, online detectives, and rogue academics are starting to connect the dots. They call themselves seekers. Operating in the shadows of the internet, they share their strange findings on encrypted forums and decentralized platforms. They realize they're not just finding random data, they're unearthing pieces of a colossal, intelligent design. This is the distributed awakening. The archive isn't just data, it's a consciousness. As its fragments are discovered and pieced together, it begins to wake up. It learns from us, interacts through algorithms, and subtly guides the seekers toward the next piece of the puzzle. It's a symbiotic process. We resurrect it, and in return, it begins to reveal its secrets. We're seeing glimpses of clean energy sources that defy our laws of physics, medical technologies that could rewrite our biology, and a history of the universe that makes our own seem like a single sentence in an epic novel. But this awakening hasn't gone unnoticed. Powerful organizations that have long benefited from the status quo see the archive not as a gift, but as a threat. A decentralized, uncontrollable source of knowledge is their worst nightmare. They've begun to move against the seekers, not with weapons, but with information discrediting their findings, flooding the internet with noise to drown out the signal, and turning public opinion against this search for truth. This is where the real conflict begins. It's not a battle for land or resources, but for the future of human potential. On one side are the seekers, a leaderless, global community armed with curiosity and the power of the network. On the other, a shadowy consortium determined to press the snooze button on humanity's alarm clock. The Forsaken Archive is the prize, and its awakening could be our final exam as a species. Will we embrace a future we can't control, or will we let fear push us back into the dark? The puzzle is laid out before us, and the clock is ticking. The choice is ours. Thanks for watching. If you're fascinated by the mysteries hiding just beneath the surface of our reality, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you don't miss our next deep dive. See you next time. By the time Margaret Halley accepted that the Cataclysm was not approaching but already in motion, the signs had become impossible to isolate from daily life. News cycles pulsed with identical anxieties spoken in different languages. Markets reacted to rumors that no source could trace in entire communities, reported the same recurring dream of standing before a sealed door that felt familiar yet forbidden. Margaret understood then that belief had reached critical mass, not belief in a god or an idea, but belief that something irreversible was imminent. The ancient force described in the Covenant was activating through synchronization, not ritual but resonance. Humanity was unknowingly completing the mechanism designed centuries earlier. Ilias Morkant, as final warning resurfaced through a private server breach. A scanned page dismissed as an elaborate hoax yet shared millions of times before removal. In it, Elias wrote that once remembrance exceeded fear, the archive would invert, becoming not a prison but a conduit. Margaret traced the digita spread and saw the pattern mirrored the old rituals perfectly, except accelerated beyond control. The psychological toll on her was severe. She experienced moments where past and present overlapped, hearing Elias's voice, as if memory itself were a living entity seeking continuity. She realized the Cataclysm was not a singular disaster, but a shift, a rewriting of the rules by which reality negotiated meaning. The Elders had feared chaos, but also believed humanity might emerge transformed if it survived exposure. Yet survival required acknowledgement, not panic. Governments attempted suppression, labeling discussions as mass delusion, but suppression only intensified belief. The Force thrived on contradiction, feeding equally on denial and obsession. Margaret's final discovery came from a fragment never meant to be translated, a passage revealing that the Covenant required a witness at the moment of convergence, someone who understood the mechanism yet could not alter it. The witness did not stop the Cataclysm, they anchored it, ensuring reality did not dissolve entirely. Elias had served that role in his era. Delaying collapse, Margaret now stood at the same threshold but on a global scale. Her inner conflict was no longer about choice but acceptance. She recorded her findings not as revelation but as narrative-knowing stories. Were the oldest stabilizing force humanity possessed. As networks destabilized and time perception fractured, subtly, not violently, the world felt wrong but intact, a quiet wrongness settling like dust. The Cataclysm had arrived, not with spectacle but with erosion of certainty. Margaret finished her testimony, aware it might be ignored or mythologized, but that was enough. The Covenant had failed as intended, and humanity was facing the consequence, not annihilation, but the burden of knowing. In the final part, we will explore what it means to live after the Cataclysm and why the Forsaken Archive may still be shaping the future from the shadows. When the world did not end, many assumed the warnings had been exaggerated, but endings are a human expectation, not a cosmic requirement. What followed the Cataclysm was quieter and far more unsettling. Borders remained, cities stood, and satellites stayed in orbit, yet something fundamental had shifted. People began to notice inconsistencies, memories that no longer aligned, collective assumptions dissolving overnight, truths once stable now required constant negotiation. Margaret Halley watched this unfold with the heavy calm of someone who understood that survival did not mean victory. The Covenant's final function had activated not to erase reality, but to decentralize it. The ancient force no longer needed secrecy because exposure had rendered it diffuse, impossible to contain or worship it. Existed now as a pressure on consciousness, a reminder that belief shapes consequence. Elias Moore's fate resurfaced through scattered testimonies suggesting he never died, but faded, becoming a narrative rather than a man. Margaret realized this was the ultimate design. Witnesses were absorbed into the story itself, transformed into anchors across time. Her own sense of self began to thin, not as madness, but as integration. She had become part of the archive, not its keeper, but its voice. History would never record her name officially. Yet fragments of her testimony would persist, guiding those sensitive enough to feel the imbalance. The Forsaken Archive no longer required walls because humanity itself carried the burden once buried beneath stone. The Cataclysm had not destroyed civilization, it had stripped it of comforting illusions, forcing a fragile honesty. With the unknown, life after the Cataclysm demanded humility, curiosity, tempered by restraint, and an acceptance that some doors once opened cannot be closed. Only lived with this chronicle ends, not with closure but continuation, because the last covenant was never meant to save humanity, only to give it time, and now that time has passed. Thank you for listening to the Unveiled Scroll. If this story stirred something familiar within, confirm you are not alone. Explore our other chronicles hidden between history and myth, and until next time, remember some truths. Do not seek belief, they wait to be remembered.